time for space reflects the viewpoint in my research, and it has twofold meaning for me. The first meaning refers to the need for a resilient built environment that can endure. The other meaning is referring to the fact that it is high time to consider the spatial context as important criteria for sustainability, which for obvious reasons has been focusing on energy efficiency. The spatial criteria, however, has an immense instrumental role to play in energy efficiency and the depletion of natural resources, let alone the well-being of people. We cannot afford, in very short cycles, build and rebuild our environment. This brings us to the question, will the built environment produced today, the way we do it, be resilient in the long run? By the side of climate change, there is also an accelerating social change going on. Lifestyles, demographics, family structures are changing. People are migrating to cities, and the working life experiencing major changes. Self-employment, patchy working careers, working from home, digitalization, and so on. Even production, to some extent, is moving back to cities as part of our habitats. And these changes are occurring in very rapid cycles to which our building stock and living environments to large extent are not prepared for. There is apparent tension and conflict between our needs and the everyday production of built environment. This is an image of Restaurant Day in Helsinki inner city. I think it's a fantastic image, not only how it epitomizes this conflict, but also how it portrays the lengths the people need to go due to the lack of living interface between the street and the building to be able to spontaneously take hold of the urban space. This is an image from the inner city of Amsterdam, in which you can argue has a restaurant day almost every day. The social interaction between people comes naturally and easily, and the street is not just a thoroughfare for movement. The buildings have living and open interface with urban contexts. The inner city of Amsterdam is also a good example of resilient built environment. The old merchant houses, which some of them date back to 17th century, have been in very different uses and still are, and have been able to survive and be cherished by its inhabitants and visitors. This is because it has certain qualities that are crucial for its survival, its adaptive building stock and the meanings it can create in people. It is not a question of style, but high architectural quality. Why is it then that we are already demolishing buildings that are only a few decades old? There are some background assumptions behind the way they were designed and constructed that makes them prone for demolition. This is a typical suburban area built in Finland during 1960s, which was the time period when housing production was industrialized in Finland. The change in construction culture was incomparable in Europe. It was guided by efficiency demand of housing construction, which was largely motivated by the will to create an important economic driver for Finland through new industry of housing production. Even though the quality of building, particularly considering the elevation design, has since improved a lot, and there's definitely much more effort put into the design and execution of public and semi-public spaces, Inside the buildings, not that much has changed. The construction methods are rather similar, and the housing design still follows quite the same trajectory, meant to solve very different kind of challenges than we are facing today. In the heart of all this lies the efficiency and optimization demand, which is already questioning the interest of people and their well-being. We are also making more and more efficient dwellings in a way which is making the buildings also more inflexible. When the buildings cannot adapt to new and emerging needs, they vanish. This is an image I use to epitomize this situation, considering the building processes. A portrays the very one-sided and non-developing housing production that is constantly producing its mirror image. B, on the other hand, portrays developing production culture, which is constantly evolving and able to produce an ecosystem of different solutions. This is very important because if you build mainly based on single idea, the mistakes you make are then also going to be big. We are already experiencing this as consequences of the suburban construction period, which bills we are still paying. There is a need for ambitious learning and developing curve in spatial production culture that it will be resilient in the long run. How should we change the background assumptions and enter the resilient path? One essential aspect is to move away from understanding the buildings as purposely built products meant largely for the first inhabitants and users, and move to comprehend the buildings as processes that can, as their intrinsic character, adapt to very different uses. The building should offer very different scenarios to emerge because we cannot predict the needs of the future generations. What is then meant by resilience? Resilience is an interesting concept because it holds inside simultaneously change and endurance, seemingly opponent concepts. To be resilient and endure, the system has to have a capacity to change. The adaptability and flexibility are then the core essences of resilience, but not all kind of flexibility serves adaptability. Important aspects of resilience is that the changes can be felt over different hierarchical scales, which in spatial contexts related to housing means that changes in dwelling spaces can have effects on building in the urban level and in society. This means a need for rethinking efficiency and optimization in apartment building design and spatial production in general. The resilient spatial contexts could be defined through concept of time, endurance, space, how to make buildings adaptive, and use that serves unpredictable uses by people. How can we accomplish resilient spatial contexts? I call this kind of resilient adaptability as typological flexibility, which focus is on building level. It understands the buildings as ongoing processes in which no state is understood as final state. One good example of enduring 200 years old typological flexibility is very typical English house type of Victorian house from 19th century, very similar to Amsterdam merchant houses. This is a diagram of its spatial configuration. It has originally worked as one family house, but since then buildings have been changed to hotels, office and commercial spaces, and back to different sizes of dwellings from small to big and so on. What is essential for them is the appropriate relationship between the circulation properties, the stairwell, and the spaces it feeds in. Because of the optimal span and scarce use of carrying walls, the spaces can be divided into smaller units, and every unit has potentially its own entrance door, so that they can also function independently from each other and can be used in multiple ways for different uses. This solution cannot be viewed very efficient in Finnish housing production demands, but it gives immense flexibility for the whole building. I see that we should move towards this kind of space unit thinking in which we do not anymore understand dwellings as 1 room, 2 room, 3 room dwellings and so on, with fixed boundaries and uses, but spaces could be formed from independent space unit according to needs in different times. This was not fix the building stock to certain spatial configuration and uses, and we wouldn't be building wrong kind of houses in wrong places. Instead of making singular dwelling more efficient and optimizing the wrong component, we could, through space unit thinking, have the whole building stock in efficient use according to respective needs. What I mean with space unit is not a modular construction unit for easy construction. These kind of buildings can also be very inflexible in use. I call for space unit thinking which is based on abstract modularity, in which the units can be connected and separated even though the boundaries are not yet so precisely defined and fixed, so that they do not prevent the connecting of spaces. Here is a building design of Kellokas housing in which I have used space unit thinking. The building can be divided into 6 dwellings or be used as one big house and everything in between. Some of these units can be used as workspaces, even as commercial space on the ground floor, because they have their own entrance properties and big windows. It is also good to notice that flexibility does not need to be anonymous in its character. It can have architectural identity, which is the food for meaning creation in our human lives. The space unit thinking can be applied also to bigger apartment blocks, in which it gives even more possibilities for different ways of connecting and separating space units. The dwellings can grow and contract even in vertical direction, and the permutations are endless. The more there is connection possibilities, the better the buildings can adapt to changes. People can rent or sell parts of their dwellings away and vice versa in different life situations. Nowadays, people need to make the biggest changes in their living conditions when they are most vulnerable. When partner dies, they get ill, divorce, or get unemployed. Often these contexts affect our lives only temporarily, but as a consequence, people need to move away from familiar surroundings, change schools, or move further away from friends nearby, which is particularly difficult for elder people. They could, for example, live longer in their homes, which have become too big to manage, and get resources or help by selling or renting a part of the dwelling away, as one example. To support the new space unit logic and people's differentiating needs and aspirations, there is a need to be able to reorganize the rooms also and the spaces inside the dwelling as well. On the left, there is a typical 3-room dwelling produced today, which room organization cannot be easily adjusted. On the right, there is a dwelling based on a new kind of design thinking, which gives deciding power to the inhabitants over the space they occupy, how they want to use it, how they want to divide it. This demands a new kind of flexible ideas also for technical installations and other technical features. I have redefined the context for the time, space and use diagram to define resilient space. Time is understood as breathability, which epitomizes a new kind of metabolic character of buildings. The buildings can breathe in and breathe out different uses and functions. The dynamism epitomizes the way the flexibility is designed in the building to promote this kind of metabolism. And it can be done in very many different ways. The use is understood as elasticity of space, so that the people can affect easily the spatial context of the space they occupy. We can reformulate the question portrayed in the beginning, how to make resilient built environment, as how to make buildings living. To pinpoint the aspects of living buildings and living built environments, they should comprise the dynamic interface between the buildings and the urban contexts, the flexible and adaptable spatial characters designed for buildings, and that the built environment is experienced as meaningful by people so that they want to preserve it. This is linked to its high architectural quality. The longer span for buildings we aim, the better it should be. Thank you very much.